In this episode of RIPPIN, we preview season 2021 for the New Zealand Warriors and the Gold Coast Titans. We discuss the thick boy, 100% pure Kiwi beef strategy that the Warriors are deploying for this season, and also we touch on the hype surrounding the Gold Coast Titans and if they'll be able to live up to it. We also dedicate a part of our episode to the ongoing Cameron Smith saga. Willie or won't he? Tune in to this episode to find out.
Well, I think I'd be remiss if we mentioned the New Zealand Warriors and their 2020 season, that we should probably just, make mention of the fact of how much of a tough go they had of it last year. Like, obviously, we all know with COVID, with lockdowns, every team was doing it tough. And I know the Warriors didn't like to use it as an excuse, but they had it the toughest. What would it have been if the season started at the end of May? I'm pretty sure that they got to Australia around the end of April, the start of May, and the season ran through until October, I'm pretty sure. So what's that? That's about 6 months where they just had no contact with their family or their loved ones. And then with New Zealand, they have pretty strict quarantine rules. When they did go back home to New Zealand, there was an extra 2 weeks on top of that. So just to have that stuff going on, let alone having to go up and play footy against 15 other of the top teams in the world, is absolutely ridiculous. And to be honest with you, over the course of the season, I thought the Warriors played a lot better than what the Warriors normally do. Normally we can sort of attribute the Warriors to being those flash-in-the-pan type of teams that when the going's good, they're absolutely running away with it, and when the going gets tough, they sort of just seem to put their heads in the sand and just pull themselves out of the contest. That was the complete opposite for the Warriors in 2020. They hung in there. They had a good team. You could tell that there was a lot of resolve within the playing group. They really wanted to play for each other. And on one hand, you could say that not being with your family, obviously, is a massive detriment to your health and your well-being. But also as well, it sort of gives you something else to play for. You know what I mean? If you know that the guy standing next to you hasn't seen his wife in 2 months and you haven't seen your kid in 2 months, then why not just put your fucking best foot forward? And that's what the Warriors did all season long. Unfortunately, they've got to do much of the same this year to be in the competition. Obviously, being the only team outside of Australia in the NRL, they're the only team that, again, has to pretty much be away from their family. I think it's pretty much the exact same as what it was last year. But with saying that, they have brought along a fair few decent recruits, particularly a few Australian recruits. And of those, I'll start with, before I throw it over to Alex, I'd like to start with Ewan Aitken. I think he's exactly the type of player that the Warriors have needed for a while, which is just a strong, defensively strong, able attacking center who can just roll his socks up and just kind of get through some work. We know, we'll touch over when we get through the ins a little bit later on. The Warriors have, let's say, gone for a bit of a thick boy season, we could say. So having outside backs are going to be really crucial. And the Warriors have typically had really big, strong, able wingers. Manu Vatuvei comes to mind straight away. But also for the last couple of years, they've had David Fusatua and Ken Mamalo. And they take a lot of pressure off the forward pack. I think that's going to be Ewan Aitken's job even more so, because you watch him play footy, it's hard to watch a Dragons game, but when he was playing, he is just a fun guy to watch. Yeah, he got put on his ass against Katoni Staggs for that try of the year contender, but I don't know too many blokes that are going to be able to attack Katoni Staggs when he wants to actually get himself over the line. So I think, Ewan Aitken is a fantastic signing straight off the bat. Sean Sullivan from the Broncos provides depth. And again, I think an important thing to have in the squad is just blokes that are Australian. Not for any other reason, but just because you need guys that they might still be able to sort of hang out with their families a little bit and lift the morale of the other guys. And also, with that being said as well, they can invite these guys over to their houses, right? So if some of these guys that the Kiwis don't have their families with them, if you've got some mates and you've got some family, you can bring them over to your house and you can make it more of a family feel, which I think will really help the Warriors moving forward this season.
Yeah, for me, so many what-ifs for the Warriors in 2020. Faced so much adversity, not just due to COVID-19, but then also, a coaching situation that went a bit pear-shaped there. And then they had an awesome coach in Todd Payton that, in the end, had to make a decision to, go back to Australia for his family, and probably because he really wanted to coach the Cowboys. So They had a lot of what ifs, particularly when you consider that they lost 5 super close games to some of the best. I think it was the Roosters, the Eels, the Panthers. Like, they came so close to some of the best teams, the top 4 teams, and they just fell short. So change a couple of those results, they make the 8. They were super close even when they were leading or about to win like the second last game of the season over the Sharks. And I think they just hit a wall. I was watching the game and it was like, they're on, they can do this. And it was just too much for them, I think. And maybe to an extent they just wanted to go home. And you could forgive them for that at the end of that season. But so many what ifs. And the worst part is it doesn't get much easier this season. Yes, they have to be based here in Australia again this season, but at the very least, they've got time to prepare this time around. They know what's facing them. They're already over here. They've been training the house down, and they're going to do this together. And I think at the very least this season, they're going to be able to see their families a little bit more or something like that. It's obviously not as strict nowadays here in Australia, so that's good if it can stay that way. But yeah, they've actually done some pretty good additions to their roster. Ewan Aitken, of course, I agree with you. Like, game changer. They've probably one position where they were still lacking was centre. Patrick Herbert, I think, started to sort of make a name for himself at the end of last year as a centre, but he's now gone to the Titans. But Ewan Aitken is an improvement on Patrick Herbert, so that's a plus. But already set on the wings, I think Ken Mamalo was close to leading try scorer the year before, and then I don't think he played last season because he opted out, I think. So they've got their top 2 wingers back. They've got Cody Nikorima now playing full-time 5'8", who is far and away better than Blake Green. You got Chanel Harris-Tavita, who, wow, like, that guy is just increasing in confidence all the time and plays well above his weight. So, that's looking good. And then their biggest additions are, of course, in the forwards. And when I say biggest, I literally mean the biggest. Like, this is going back to the Warriors of the 2000s and 2010s when they made 2 grand finals. And that is just having the biggest, meanest forward pack you can imagine and just bashing teams to death. Interestingly, though, so the additions there are Adam Fanua-Blake, Ben Murdoch-Masila, Kane Evans, and also Bailey Sirenen as well too. So there's another who's a bit more of a mobile forward, but some good additions to the back row and to the forward pack. And it's interesting that they've gone for such size and ferocity, considering that the game is getting faster and faster. I love it. I love that the game is becoming that way. But it's interesting to see them go for a big pack. Can they keep up? That's the big question mark. This team could roll over people or they could gas out. So I admire the fact that they're taking a different approach and a different strategy. And if it pays off, they'll be absolute masterminds. But if it doesn't, well, the first place you're going to look is, a couple of these big boys that, frankly, don't have the best conditioning in the world just from looking at them.
Yeah, from the outside looking in, particularly looking at the stats over the last few seasons, you'd have to think that this experiment isn't going to work because, yeah, they're fucking big. Like, they're really, really big. And while I agree that you do need to have somebody in your forward pack, maybe 2 guys that can still, do the big boy stuff, but a lot of the top guys can do everything. So the first person that comes to mind for me is Josh Papali. He's a big boy, but his ankle tap on Jamal Fogarty, that's going to go down in history as one of the greatest effort plays ever. They're going to be showing that for this is why you never give up on a play. Just over and over again. A Jad Ria-Hargreaves, absolutely monster. But he is blessed with a system that has a lot of 80-minute back rowers, a coach that knows how to use him and knows when to bring him on. Jad Ria-Hargreaves isn't going to be playing 80 minutes. Then on the flip side of that, you've got a Payne Haas, right? He's probably him and Taumalolo are the molds of this new breed of forward that can and will play 80 minutes. Not just if they don't have the bench space for it. He can play 80 minutes and would like to, and they will get 300 meters. They will get you 50 tackles. The Warriors are putting a lot of pressure on all of these players. To one, if you know that what's Fanua-Blake. So you know that you're going to be starting the game. You got a 25-minute stint. It's going to be a big fucking 25 minutes. If you're down after that 25 minutes, and then you guys are losing, right? You're losing because they're getting around you like they're a faster, they're a fitter team. Who do you have on the bench to call upon that's going to change that around? Like, that's the thing, like, where footy's sort of moving towards, is that the Melbourne Storm were carrying Ryan Pappenhausen in number 14 before they brought him into fullback, right? Like, Origin is always one of the places where, like, the Blues had 4 forwards in Game 2 and Game 3, and it actually cost them big time because what happened? Their fullback got injured. They didn't have a like-for-like replacement to bring in and had to shuffle the whole team around. The Warriors are putting a lot of their chips, all of their chips pretty much, into the basket of, we're not going to have any injuries, we're not going to have any dramas, and we're just going to be able to go big boy out, big boy coming in, big boy out, big boy coming in. But there's no more, as we touched on last week, there's no more scrums anymore. There's pretty much no more scrums. It's all going to be hand over and play the balls and stuff like that. The referees are being told consistently, we've got to keep the game like sped up. We've got to keep the game moving forward. Andrew Fifita, has come out and said that he's looking to lose a lot of weight over the offseason. He's trying to lose 20, 30 kilos because he knows his brother over in the Super League, they started playing with some of these rules that the NRL is adopting this year, and his brother was saying that it's a completely different fucking ball game, that it is so demanding on you physically. And the thing for me is that the Warriors are going the complete opposite direction of, like, all the other 15 teams, but not for the right reasons. It's not like it's not like they've discovered something, right? Like that they've, like, discovered some sort of, like, different thing in sports science or something like that. They're just betting on, like, oh well, we can't get fit guys in here, so let's just try the big boys. And I think it's just going to fall flat on their fucking face.
That's the one thing I do agree with, is that it's a bit of an antique strategy. Many teams have tried it in the past. The Raiders of just a couple of years ago, they did it. They had some big boppers. They had the Shannon Boyds and Junior Paulos and Tom Leroy Larses and all these guys who were just injury prone, couldn't do the minutes, and yeah, you could just get a zippy 5'8" or center or fullback just running rings around them at the wrong time of the game. And that's something I think that's an important consideration, no matter what forward you have, whether you have an 80-minute Haas or you have a 40-minute Adam Fanua-Blake, let's say. It's about time and intensity. And that's probably the one, like, problem that I have with the Payne Haas strategy, is that he can play 80 minutes and does play 80 minutes, but how many of them are actually at 100% intensity because he knows that he needs to drag it all the way through. And that's what they ended up doing with Josh Papali, and it obviously paid off for the Raiders, is that he was playing bigger minutes. I think there was a period there where he was playing 70 and 80 minute games, and they just realised, like, but you're not at your best when you do that. When you need to hold back to make sure you can make it through, then you're not the damaging runner that we need you to be. And so they have to drag him kicking and screaming off the field sometimes because they want him to come back on in another 20 minutes and rip him to shreds again. And, there's so many examples we could look at where he's done that many times against the Roosters last season. So yeah, it's interesting to go with the full big boy strategy. But they do have an addition that I think is one of their X factors. He is an addition from midway through 2020, originally off a loan deal, but then he's now signed a contract. And that's Jack Murchie. So as a Raiders fan, this is one guy I definitely rued that we lost, because this is a guy that was top team in the last season of the Toyota Cup, or it was Holden Cup by then or something, but he was one of the best 17 players in that competition. He's only played 2 games for the Raiders in the 2018-2019 season because they just didn't really give him a run. I also understand that he was probably a bit of a casualty of what was becoming a great forward pack in the Raiders, and I can't wait to cover that next week. So, there was some players that needed to move on. But, like, now that he's got his chance at the Warriors, he's showing the skill. There was a couple of games last season where he tore teams to shreds. Like, I'm talking scoring tries, assisting tries. Like, he's got a great offload. He's a big guy, so he's probably similar in size to Adam Fanua-Blake, but far more mobile. So this guy's got speed and got endurance. So I really would love to see that guy starting in the second row or lock. And if not, they're just going to keep using him off the bench at the very least. And he can be a huge impact player. Like, inserting him into the game in the 30th to 60th minute is when he can run through teams. So they do have at least one guy that I can think of that could do what you've mentioned. They don't really have on their squad, but that's only one X factor.
Yeah, it's an interesting point with the the Josh Papali and sort of ripping him off the field, because there were a few games of footy last year. In particular, I remember the semi-final with the Raiders and the Roosters, where footy sort of started to become now I like to look at it as like 4 20-minute stints, because normally that's like the time frame that these forwards are doing stints. So you sort of watch and you go, okay, So, and Josh Papali played the first 25 minutes, Rhea Hargreaves played the first 30, and the Raiders won that 20-minute stint or 30-minute stint, let's say like 12-6. And then what you're doing is then as you get into the second half, it's almost like a who blinks first between Ricky Stewart and Robinson, where it's like, who's going to put Papali or Jad Rhea Hargreaves on first? Because you don't want to be the first one to do it, and you want to hold out as long as you can, right? Because ideally you want to have both those guys as close to 100% at the end of the game. And you want them on the field at the end of the game. And the way to do that, obviously, is to prolong how far into the game until you actually put them on for their second stint. And I love it. I love it when you see a guy like I think Rhea Hargreaves is a bit of a grub. He's a fucking grub, but fuck me dead if he played for the Broncos or he was a Queenslander, I'd love the bloke because he is just a guy that gets everybody around him fired up because he just pisses everybody else off on the other side, on the other team. As soon as he comes on and then as soon as Josh Papali goes on, you know that it's sort of come down to you now. It's like, okay, is Papali or Warrior Hargreaves, more importantly, the forward packs, who's going to win that battle in those close games, who's going to win? And if that's what the Warriors are doing and they're trying to sort of go like, okay, like we have belief and we have we think that we have the talent with, you mentioned Chanel Tavita, Harris Tavita, Cody Nikarima, who has come on in leaps and bounds since being unceremoniously dropped by the Broncos. RTS, who we should quickly mention, is obviously leaving for rugby in the 2022 season. I think he's just signed a 2-year deal with the Blues. How's he going to go in his final year? But he is a guy that can get you close to that 250. I think he has had a game maybe last year where he got like 300 or something meters. Like he's an absolute fucking weapon. We can talk about him for hours if we wanted to. But yeah, if the Warriors are confident that they can hold out that first 20 or 30 minute stint, get into a bit of an arm wrestle in that second half, they do have a guy like Tohu Harris who can just tackle his dick off for 80 minutes. Then in that final 20, 25 minutes, like that's where things could get interesting, right? Because I wouldn't like the idea of having to try to tackle a Adam Fanua-Blake, Ben Murdoch-Masila, who is just a round mound of just knocking cunts over, essentially. And then Kane Evans as well. Like, yeah, he's sort of struggled a little bit for form since leaving the Roosters. But again, that's because he's always been like the biggest guy because he's so big. But if Kane Evans is just one of the other guys, then does that increase his value? Because it's not just like now, the big guy can take care of Kane Evans because it's like, oh, no, like, he's not even the biggest dude anymore. Like, we've got to worry about Fanua-Blake. And then that's when those matchups start to occur, right? And then it sort of becomes that do teams get so tight at tackling these big guys that then you have Tavita Harris, Cody Nikarima, and RTS off the back of those. And then can they use their niftiness to sort of get around them? That'll be interesting to see. But I think that's me putting too much, like, this is a system that has been proven not to work. And it's not like you're going up against some AI in a video game, right? We're just going to keep running it on more game because the Robinsons, the Bellamys, the Ricky Stewarts are going to kick early. Like Jack White, and if they play the Raiders, is going to kick down into the corners early and make them run back and forward. Like Cameron Muntu is going to do the same. I want them to do well because I think they've had an absolute shorthand of it. But fuck, they're going to make it difficult for themselves. And like I said, the only X factor that I think they truly have in terms of NRL level X factor, not reaching for a Joe Vengawa or something like that, is obviously RTS. And RTS, he's gone for next year. So, do they have enough to win a premiership this year? No. And then that's a massive hole to try to fill for 2022 to try to bring somebody in that's going to replace RTS. I just don't think they can do it.
Yeah, I can speak to both of those guys because, I definitely think that Chanel Tavita Harris is going to be, or Harris Tavita, sorry, is going to be their X factor because he's kind of deployed the antithesis to the model that Anthony Milford's deployed in that Chanel has gotten really, really good and developed into a smart footy player fast and kept getting better, where, of course, Anthony Milford did not do that. In just this last season, what's he called? CHT? CTH? It's a hard name to remember. Let's call him Chanel. In just one season, you just watch him from game to game, just becoming more comfortable in his own skin, running the plays, backing himself for these crazy plays and single-handedly at times keeping them in the game or winning them games. He's just got such a big heart for such a medium-sized body. So I think if he can just keep going on the trajectory that he's going to be the future, and which does link in with this RTS, which has just been a massive blow in the last 7 days in terms of he's been that team. At times he's been the only player on that team, and that's what maybe frustrated him. that he was giving it his absolute everything, and it still wasn't enough because he didn't have the support around him, or all of his efforts didn't result in wins. So maybe that was getting under his skin, and I don't think it was about the money. I can't imagine him getting paid more by the Blues than what he's being paid now, if he is great. But I don't think it was about the money. I think it was probably just like the effort to reward, which kind of is like really frustrating. It must be frustrating for Warriors fans out there, because Chanel was probably going to be his guy. Like, the guy was finally there. It wasn't Blake Green. It wasn't Adam Kieran for a brief period there. It's Cody Nikorima, who definitely stepped up his game last year, and Chanel, because like, this kid is good. And they could have kind of developed a combo very similar to what DCE and Tommy Turbo have at Manly, in that one of them makes a break, or one of them gets an inside ball off the other, and then finds the other when you come up to the fullback. It's a play that Manly runs time and time again. One of the two is going to make the break and then find the other backing up on the inside. I could have 100% seen that being the case for years to come for these two players. And RTS had to go and sign a contract with Rugby.
Yeah, I think Warriors fans obviously would be pissed that RTS is gone, but I would imagine that a lot of Warriors fans probably also support the All Blacks, because I've heard rugby's pretty big over in NZ, and playing for the All Blacks, I think, isn't really rivaled, particularly to anything in New Zealand sport, but I would imagine in most sports, I think playing for the All Blacks is one of the highest pinnacles in the world. And I think, sort of step away from Warriors for a second and just talk about RTS. I think it's a perfect business move, because I think the happiest fans from this RTS news is going to be Newcastle, because now Kalyn Ponga, obviously he's got 2 player options in the final 2 years of his contract. Rugby World Cup is 2023. So been a lot of chat about him going to play for the All Blacks. You'd think that his position would probably be fullback, right? Well, now RTS is just gone, well, fuck you, because I'm going to start playing rugby union in 2022. You don't get out of your player option until the end of 2022, so into 2023. So now you've got to make the decision. It's like, now does Kalyn Ponga go, oh, okay, I want to play for the All Blacks, but do I want to be the starting fullback? Do I want to be the starting fullback, and do I go up against RTS, who's going to have a year's worth of more recent experience on me? Or do I decide to just stay in rugby league, or do I try to make it into another position? So I think that's going to be something that, this domino falling could have protected Kalyn Ponga from leaving to go to Union, because now there's this massive roadblock in the way of him making the All Blacks team. But I also think as well that I hope that RTS does well in Union. I don't really care for the Wallabies too much, just because they've shit the bed just unceremoniously for the last 5 to 10 years. We could do an entire episode. We're a rugby league podcast, but I could do an entire episode on just how the Australian Rugby Union could have literally just followed what New Zealand Rugby Union did in terms of the pathways and everything else, and put themselves up to a really good standard. But then the issue is the Wallabies have no way, shape and hell of getting any of the top Australian Rugby League stars to come over outside of Folau, but Folau came from AFL, remember. The All Blacks are literally allowed to pluck New Zealand's top fullback, so one of the top most exciting positions from their top home team, and everyone's just kind of yeah, man, go do it. You know what I mean? And it's just a move that he deserves. He could have left home early at the end of last season. I think he was carrying some injuries, but he refused to leave early. He wanted to stay there until the end because he was a captain and he felt it was his obligation. He's such a classy dude. And it just seems to suck for him that just nothing seemed to fall in place at the same time. Obviously SJ's time at the club was coming to an end as RTS was sort of coming in over there. They've always been a team that you look at them and they've maybe always been 1 or 2 signings away from really sort of being the top team. And then, the Warriors go out and they have this big spending spree and they get these guys in a pretty crazy time. It'd be a tough thing to sell to a lot of players. Oh, hey guys, they're going to come play for the Warriors. Just also, you might not be able to see your family because if you buy a home in NZ, you're not going to really be living there anyway because we're going to be over in Australia for the whole year. And then now their star player, their marquee guy has just gone later bowl. It sucks for him, it really does, and it's shut that premiership window into a really small window of it's this year or bust, because you can't try to replace RTS. There's no fullback who's gonna go to the Warriors. The whole reason why they got RTS was because he wanted to move back to NZ, right? Who are they going to get? Jermaine Isako? he wants to go back to NZ, fucking take him for all I fucking care. But other than that, I don't think there's any other good Kiwi fullbacks. So they just put themselves in a hole, and that hole for me, I think, is going to see them probably in a... I got them as 12th, to be honest, just below the Bulldogs for their season. Like, I think the bottom's going to be a lot more competitive. I don't think you're going to have any of the teams having, 0 to 4 wins. I think there's going to be a lot of, infighting between those bottom teams. But I just don't see the Warriors being able to make those next steps, particularly as well with just their big boppers that they have running around the place.
Yeah, when the RTS news came out, the very first articles I started seeing was, let's make a play to get Chansey back. And I was like, you stay away! No way they're taking CNK. And I would hope, CNK, if you're watching this, I would hope, or listening, that you repay the faith that the Raiders showed you and you sign a 10-year deal.
Come to the Broncos. We'll get Jermaine Isako out of here and we'll put it right here, Chansey, Brisbane. This is where you're supposed to be, mate. You got that Pullity haircut not too long. I think yesterday you got the Pullity haircut. He's ready to go. He's ready to go on Brisbane. Get it done, Kevy.
Please, Chansey, no. But there's a couple points there. I mean, one tangent I'll quickly go on is the Kalyn Ponga to rugby. I just think that's crazy. Because are we not being honest with ourselves, and is Kalyn Ponga not being honest with himself about his drawbacks? Like, undoubtedly a crazy skilled player, like breaking ankles left, right, and centre. Fuck, he's small, and playing rugby union, that's not going to work out so well. He's not the best defensive fullback. RTS is a pretty good defensive fullback, so it makes sense that he would transition to rugby. But I think he's probably a bit small to play top tier rugby, at the very least for the All Blacks. Hey, if you want to play for the Wallabies, walk in. But I think he's a bit small. The concussions and shit that he's already getting, I think are making that window a little bit smaller than what it would be otherwise. But yeah, I'm not sure about Kalyn Ponga playing rugby and playing for the All Blacks. I think that's a bit of a pipe dream, and you should enjoy your 1 point whatever millions that you're getting at the Knights. But finally, yeah, the RTS news, man, it's just crazy. Like, I had the Warriors finishing 8th in my ladder. And I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to back them nonetheless. But this has got to be a huge blow because, how did this come out before the season, number one? I feel like maybe, yeah, you tell your teammates and, you got to keep it under wraps because we got to get the job done. But, making this deal before an entire season before you go, how many disruptions? So if I was one of the young guys in that team now, and one of your idols, because most likely, if you're a young guy on that team, RTS is one of your idols. One of your idols has just turned his back on your team and turned his back on rugby league as a whole. That's got to be a huge kick in the teeth. And is his focus now 100% on the Warriors? There's just a question there. I personally think that RTS has got more class than that, and I think he'll still give his all like he has always done. There's one thing you could never fault him on, is that he's an effort player. He gives it all. But, there's just an opportunity there where maybe he's just 10 rounds in, they're not doing super well. Fuck it, I'm going with rugby next season anyway. So this just really puts an asterisk on their potential prospects for this year. But I'm going to back them because if I look at their standings from last year, they were closer to the 8 than they bloody well should have been, to be honest, and they have improved their squad. I think their squad is better this year than it was last year. So I see them improving. So I'm going to back them in for 8th. All right. We're up to the Gold Coast Titans. Our, 9th place finishes from 2020. Fucking so close, boys. They're almost there. But before we get into their prospects for 2021, I think we all want to know our opinion on the Cameron Smith debacle. So, all the media outlets, as of right now, are reporting that Cameron Smith will be signing with the Gold Coast Titans. So my question to you, Master Spencer, is it true? And if so, what does it mean for the Titans?
Well, I hope it's not fucking true, because that'd just be shit, really. For the first point, that Cameron Smith has his reign of terror over the Brisbane Broncos has just never stopped since the 2006 Grand Final, and I finally thought that there might be a small window, a bee's dick of a chance of us not having to deal with him anymore. And if this is the case, he's now signed to our closest rival and a team that also took arguably our best player from last year. And just add insult to injury, apparently they've got about $600K left in their salary cap. And for a man that was getting $1 million a year for the last 4 years, they're getting some pretty big unders on that, which I think is just bullshit, first and foremost, because the NRL has no consistency with these types of matters. And I don't know, like the first thing I'll say is that the Titans for a while were being managed and run by the NRL because of the debacle that they were in. And like for the NRL to now come out and say that they're allowed to sign Cameron Smith with or they're not going to stand in the way of the Titans signing Cameron Smith with what's left in his contract, in their salary cap, then what's to say that the Melbourne Storm aren't allowed to do that? Like, why weren't the Melbourne Storm allowed to offer, $250,000 to, any Tom, Dick and Larry that wants to come through? Like, it sets such a ridiculous precedent where you can just start signing these guys on unders contracts just for the sake of putting together a good team. This can be an argument for another day, but I just think that's a little bit shifty and shaky. If it does indeed happen, it blows the premiership race wide open. Because like you and I, obviously, we both did we did our notes on the Gold Coast Titans, and we were doing that with the idea that Cameron Smith wasn't going to be there. So we're obviously doing it with the current team they have now. But the Cameron Smith effect could, I've tipped them to be right around the 8, just missing the 8. But if Cameron Smith is there, like I see them potentially reaching the top 4. I think it's hotly contested. So there'd have to be a lot of learning. There'd have to be a lot of games against tough competition. I'm looking at the Raiders, the Rabbits, the Roosters, the Panthers. Like, if they play each of those teams twice, they're going to have to beat. If there's 8 games against those top 4 teams, they've got to win at least 3 to 5 of those games to be a chance. Not only for obviously the latter, but also to believe in themselves. But with Cameron Smith there, we'd both agree that hooker's probably the biggest weak spot that they have in their side right now. And you go from potentially Mitch Rain as your hooker to easily the greatest hooker of all time, arguably the greatest player of all time as well.
So just to be clear, 2 things. So number 1, you do believe they're going to sign him, and number 2, I would also like to know your opinion, because this is something that's very hotly contested in the rugby league community and certainly between the two of us. In your opinion, is Cameron Smith that good, or was it Craig Bellamy and the Storm?
I don't see him doing it. I don't see him coming back to the Titans only because there's nothing left for him to achieve. I think Cameron Smith isn't one of those guys that's really, looks like, again, this is all speculation, that is motivated or driven for money. And obviously, $600,000 is still a lot of money. He seems to be a family man. The chat is that moving back to Queensland was actually a big help for him because it allowed him to sort of spend more time with his family and settle down and get back to their roots a little bit. But also as well, it's the I look at guys like Darius Boyd or Cooper Cronk, particularly Cooper Cronk, because he said that he was going to retire with the Storm. And then he ended up unretiring and playing for the Roosters. And then he did the same thing where he said that he's retiring at the end of the season and did that early in the season. So there's big hubbub, this big fanfare. Darius Boyd did the same thing. He said that he was retiring. I thought he was retiring that day of the press conference. I got very happy. I actually read the article and it said that he was retiring at the end of the season, and I tried to hang myself again. Cameron Smith didn't do any of that because he does not into any of that bullshit. And I firmly believe that the media is just to build stories. They're trying to make it look like he is coming back, whereas I think Cameron Smith just wanted to ride off into the sunset, and he scored a try in the grand final. He willed the Melbourne Storm against this young Panthers side that won 17 straight. And also as well, I think legacy for a guy like Cameron Smith, I think is pretty important. And I think of all the top guys at Queensland, particularly I don't say Queensland is we're taking away New South Wales. New South Wales have plenty of great players, but I didn't pay enough attention to them growing up to think that I can speak about them. So I just specifically speak about Queenslanders. And you look at Jonathan Thurston. He won the grand final in 2015. He tried to run it back for 2 more years, and he got injured, and then the Cowboys just got dumped out of the finals, and he spent the last year of his career, one of the few games that the Titans sold out in the last 5 years was because it was Jonathan Thurston's final farewell. It's that didn't seem right for the type of player that it was, right? And then you look at Darren Lockyer. Same thing. Won a grand final. The last grand final he won with the Broncos was in 2005 or 2006. 2006 against the Melbourne Storm. obviously he had a fair few more years like on there. But if Darren Lockyer had retired then, I'm of a firm believer that you should always retire as a player, leaving the fans and the media and pundits and everybody wanting a little more. You know what I mean? Like, you want to just have like a little bit more, and then you leave. So that, like, they're always talking about you gushingly and glowing, like, oh my God, like, he was still so good when he was at the top of his game. You don't want to become the Darius Boyds. Like, Darius Boyd's career would have been looked at so much differently if he had retired before the massive drop-off in his career. Like, you look at so many, like, from different sports around the world, like Brett Favre in the NFL over in America, for example, could have left the Packers and retired there as, like, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, as an absolute, like, folk hero. But instead he went to the Jets, and then he went to the Minnesota Vikings, the Green Bay Packers' biggest rival, and then just ended up just, like, he had a streak of something like 300 games played straight, and then he got injured in his last season and had to retire, and he went all grey, like he just wasn't the same guy as a quarterback that relied on his arm strength, and it just all fell off a cliff, and it left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. Going back to Cameron Smith, he can be the one Queensland great that can leave at the top, that we didn't have to see him regress in any way, shape, or form. And that's the thing, like, if Cameron Smith was to come back, I think he could take most teams deep into the finals. I think if he played for the Broncos and he was playing number 9, he could probably take the Broncos at least into the top 8. Like, that's the type of influence and the type of impact that he has. But in terms of his legacy, I think it makes so much more sense when you tell the story in 10, 15 years' time, that just as the Melbourne Storm had Cheese and Harry Grant coming through, these youngsters in the same position, and, you know, Billy Slater had already come and gone, and Cooper Cronk had already come and gone, and Craig Bellamy was getting into his last season at the Melbourne Storm, that he closes that chapter of his career and he leaves it as a Melbourne Storm player. And I don't think it'd be fair to the Melbourne Storm, not that they deserve any kind of fairness because they've absolutely ran shock over the NRL for the last 2 decades, that he should be a one-club player. And for me personally, I like the idea of that. I like the idea of a one-club player. Like, it would have made me feel like shit if Darren Lockyer went down to Melbourne and played his final season for the Melbourne Storm. And, like, I get it. Oh, the Titans aren't a contender. Like, it's not like, you know, it's not like Cooper Cronk going to the Roosters, and I get that. But that's the same thing. Like, a lot of Storms fans would say that they didn't like Cooper Cronk as much once he left to go to the Roosters, because that was their rival and he was simply doing, and you get why he was doing it, but that doesn't mean it can't impact their legacy. To the second part of that question, was it Bellamy or was it Smith? I think that without Bellamy, Cameron Smith wouldn't have become the type of player that he is. And then I think vice versa, that without Cameron Smith, Craig Bellamy wouldn't have been able to become the coach that he is, because very much in the similar, and there's so many striking similarities between the New England Patriots with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, and then the Melbourne Storm with Cameron Smith and Craig Bellamy. It's almost like both, like Cameron Smith is like, Craig Bellamy's up in the box and he's got a controller and he's controlling what Cameron Smith is doing. That, like, everything that Cameron Smith does is what Craig Bellamy wants him to do, because Craig Bellamy had so much trust in Cameron Smith that he knew that he could put everything there. And you think going back to 2003 when Cameron Smith made his debut, I think 2000 and probably in 2004, maybe even 2003, where he made his Origin debut. Like, he's got, like, into the late 30s in games. He's just had that, like, early in his career for me, like, when Cameron Smith got picked for captain over Jonathan Thurston, I was like, why? Like, Jonathan Thurston is so much better than Cameron Smith. But the reason why is because everybody playing with Cameron Smith just looks so much better, because there are just so many things that you can't even, like, not even a great footy fan, I'm not saying there are people that are casuals or not, but even great footy fans would struggle to actually, like, understand what it is that he's doing. And it's like the little things, right? It's the rev ups in between tries. It's the, like, you know, making, you know, 50 odd tackles a game, every game for 20 games. It's being healthy and available every single game of the season. Like, for so long, it was like, what are the Melbourne Storm going to do when Cameron Smith retires? We've been talking this story for, like, 5 or 10 years now. But the thing is that Craig Bellamy knows that he can bring in these guys that are around him, and that the Melbourne Storm system is very much, we look at what your strengths are, we look at what your weaknesses are, we minimise how your weaknesses can impact you, and we maximise your strengths. But I think the Melbourne Storm have been lucky because they've been able to bring in guys that are not one-dimensional, but normally have a goal and a job to do. And the reason why they just have to focus on that job is because Cameron Smith literally tells the halves and gives the halves the freedom to do whatever they want. So, like, Cameron Munster, his job is just made so much easier having Cameron Smith there. And My thing is, I think this year, I think Craig Bellamy could go to any team and he would have a tougher job making that team good than what Cameron Smith would going into a team to make them a good team, if that makes sense. But then I think that without Craig Bellamy putting, what is it now? Cameron Smith made his debut in 2003, so 18 years. 18 years of Craig Bellamy kicking you up the arse. But obviously you need to be the type of player that reacts to that well, which Cameron Smith was. But I think without Craig Bellamy being there to give him, to like, and that the Kokoda, not the Kokoda like they did it, but like the similar thing that they did where they have the backpacks on, and I think Papenhausen was saying that like you just have to keep walking. You just have to keep walking laps like over and over again, almost like speed walking, and you just can't look behind you, can't look either way. You just keep on going and going and going until you just can't go anymore. Like, Craig Bellamy is a psychopath making his players do that, but his mindset is, I want you guys to be fucking rooted in the 79th minute, like they were in the grand final, and have a team hunting you down and they're inside your own 20. But I want you to think that's easy. And there aren't very many coaches that, A, will even think of doing that shit, but then on the flip side of that, will have players buy in. How do you have players that buy into that? You have a guy like Cameron Smith there to show them, this is like, if you listen to this guy, like, yeah, this sounds crazy, this sounds fucking stupid, but if you do this, you'll become like me. And like, again, like Cameron Smith, like, if Cameron Smith isn't the best player of all time, if there's a Mount Rushmore, he's on it. And like, I would probably say like the only guys that I've really seen have the influence that he has had over a game of footy is Jonathan Thurston. And from all reports that I've heard, I didn't watch much of it growing up, but Andrew Johns. And those three guys are literally in a class of their own. So yeah, I think it's a little bit more Cameron Smith than Craig Bellamy, only because a coach you can be the best coach in the world, but not have the players around you. And Cameron Smith was just a guy that was just able to like take his career to such heights. Like, just to play 300 games is a massive achievement in terms of like longevity. How many times have you seen Cameron Smith injured? He injured his shoulder last year scoring a try because he's just not used to scoring tries. And then I think after an Origin game, he had to go to like a pain-killing injection and like have his like ankle strapped up. But then he still played the game anyway with it like strapped up over the boot. Like, your best ability is your availability. And when Cameron Smith is there for 400 odd games, like, what's that? You play 20 regular season games a year, 400 games, like, what's that? Nearly 20 seasons worth of footy. Just, he's unbelievable, really. And yeah, he'd turn the Titans into a premiership contender if the rest of those players were to buy in. Obviously a big if. Has he been training in pre-season? I don't know. You don't know. Like, nobody really knows. But there is reports that Addo said that a few seasons ago that he had a week or two of pre-season training or something like that, and he came out, and I think that's the year that they won the premiership, and he won Dally M Hooker of the Year, or like, Rugby League Players Association Player of the Year. So it's shown that it can be done. But again, it's a big difference between and we'll talk about the signings that the Titans have made, but the difference between the Melbourne Storm and the Gold Coast Titans is fucking night and day. And does Cameron Smith have enough left in him at this late stage in his career? Like, if he does take the Titans and they win a premiership, unquestionably he's the fucking GOAT. Unquestionably he's the GOAT. Because there's no other player in recent memory that would have gone to a team that you could say was an outright downgrade in where they were and take them to a premiership. Cooper Cronk, pretty good, but that's a good thing to do. Like, you still got to guide your team around. But if you compare him winning a premiership with the Roosters versus Cameron Smith winning one with the Titans this year, there's no one else, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, to your point, it'll be so interesting to see how the Storm perform this season, because if you are right, and, Cameron Smith, so many of those little things, I would summarize it even as like, he could just, make you want to play better with a look, and that's something that's that leadership quality that I think is also in your Tom Brady, in that, like, he just makes you want to be the best version of yourself. So, if he's not there to do that this season, and not there to take the pressure off Munster, as you said, and the pressure off a number of those stars that the Storm now have, are they the same? And it'll be the biggest test of Craig Bellamy, I guess. Bill Belichick didn't have the best season post Tom Brady, so we'll see how Craig Bellamy fares. But for me, I've always just wondered with if there was just a little bit of luck there, or if it just really came down to the system and the coach, because it just seems so insane to me that so many of the top players of our generation have all been at the Storm. Did they really just sign all the best stars? Or is it actually more of a testament to Craig Bellamy and the Melbourne Storm and the system that they've developed? So that's always been the question in my mind. I've never been the biggest fan of Cameron Smith. I respect the man in many ways, but never been one of my favourites. And then I guess, as of to my opinion, or whether or not he's actually going to play for the Titans, I think no. I think you're right in that, like, what is there to gain for him? I think it's not for a paycheck. $600,000 isn't much to him, or not that he needs it. He's got plenty of other engagements, whether it be media or coaching or whatever, that can pay him at least something similar to that amount of money. So I don't think he needs to keep playing for money, certainly not for premierships. But there are some compelling arguments to why he would play and why he wouldn't play. The biggest one that I think is the biggest argument that he will play for the Titans is that I don't think it's able to be denied that he's a bit of a petty guy. He can be a petty guy, and I think that's been evident in, for example, how he handled the Cooper Cronk situation. When that all fell apart, it appeared that he had the sour grapes over Cooper Cronk doing what he had to do, or what he felt he had to do, whether it was for his partner who lived in Sydney or the final part of his career or whatever. But he was, from all accounts, very petty towards Cooper Cronk, and there was that bit of a rift, and we won't even go into the supposed affair that he may have had, Cameron Smith, but so there's some things there that make him not a perfect character, right? And so my thinking is, I think he's mad at the Broncos. He wanted to play for the Broncos. He's from Brisbane. He wanted nothing more than to play for the Broncos, and the Broncos didn't give him a look in. So I think if he is going to play, it's to shove it up the arse of the Broncos. It's never going to be for the Broncos. He's not playing for the Broncos because they didn't want him when he was young. So he's going to play for the Gold Coast Titans, who have major upside at the moment, who are, of course, as you mentioned, the Broncos' biggest rivals. They're basically taking a lot of the fans from Brisbane at the moment, who are in a definite slide. And that would be his final fuck you to the Broncos. Hey, I'm going to play for the Gold Coast this season. So that would be the pro, I think. And maybe, yes, if there is one thing that he could achieve out of being in the Gold Coast Titans, is if he can get them, I don't even think a premiership, but if he can take them to the top 4, go. Up there with the top 1 to 2 players, which typically goes to one of the halfbacks. You're talking about your Langers and your Johnses and your Thurstons. But yeah, if he could rise the Titans to that degree in one season, fantastic. Against the idea of him playing is, of course, he hasn't had a preseason. I just don't see why he would tarnish a reputation. He is a very proud man and proud of what he's achieved, and I don't see him wanting to tarnish his reputation by going to the Gold Coast and even risking a potential slide of the season. But again, on the pro for potentially him playing, you are right. There's not a lot of depth in the hookers for the Titans. They've got Mitch Rain, and then they've got that other bloke, who I don't even know his name. He's got tattoos. So, they've definitely left a spot open for him there, because they've shored up their halves, they've shored up their outside backs, they've shored up their forwards. Bloody hell, have they. So they're just waiting on a hooker. And that's why these reports are very, very interesting. But just make a decision already. That's my final word on it. It's like, I can't believe this is still up in the air. Is he playing mind games? Does he actually not know? We're 30 days out from the season. Mm-hmm. Are you playing or are you not playing? Let's go.
Yeah, and it's, for me, you talked about him being a petty guy, and that definitely can't be, questioned, at least from, the media reports. But I think that could also be a reason why he doesn't end up doing it, because he doesn't want to, if he decides to, quit, and then he's just done, and then they could ask, why didn't you, go to the Titans? He could just throw a very easy jab, because obviously, if he goes into media, he'll be at Channel 9, because Channel 9 have a history of, they don't go after good analysis. They go after the guys that were on Channel 9 the most, So that's why you have fucking 3 brain cells between them, Wally Lewis, Darren Lockyer, and Jonathan Thurston, who are really good footy players, but they're really good footy players because, everyone loved how they played, and how they played was they got fucking hit a lot. and they've got no brain cells left. So listening to those fucking idiots just drone on. And I love Jonathan Thurston, and I love Darren Lockyer, and I love Wally Lewis, but I do not love hearing them talk about footy. It is dreadful. It is absolutely dreadful. So Cameron Smith will be good for Channel 9 because he can actually speak quite well. So I don't think that he'll go there. I don't think he'll go to the Titans for reasons of that. But also as well, like a really good point that you did bring up is the fact that, yeah, the Titans don't have anybody there, but are we expecting him to play 80 minutes? 20 games? Plus at least one, maybe two, maybe three finals games? Like, the Storm did a good job. Like, I think the injury for him, I think the injury was a blessing in disguise in the sense that it like took a lot of wear and tear off of him throughout the year. So he was able to come through in that last little bit of the season and still go really well. The Melbourne Storm had the benefit where they could, and like that last season game against the Dragons, which is one of the only games, I think the only game the Dragons won against a team above them was the Melbourne B side, and they only just fucking beat them anyway. They were allowed to rest Cameron Smith, and they could keep performing without him there because they had Brandon Smith. The Titans have nobody, and like the drop-off from Cameron Smith to Mitchell Rain is huge, right? But then on top of that, like you said, we're a month away from the season. Your hooker's pretty important, a really important part of your team. Like, pretty much controls your forwards, is the first ball service to your halves and your 5/8s. And I'm not saying that Cameron Smith can't in there and pick it up quickly, but is like, say he signs with them tomorrow. It's 29 days until the season starts. Is 29 days enough to crack the whip on Jamal Fogarty and Ash Taylor and the outside backs and the forwards and to get them to a situation where he wants them to be? Well, I don't know if that's enough time. And particularly as well, you got to think that like the Titans are already in overdrive at the moment because they have so many new recruits coming in, right? That they've got to try to like, at the moment, I would assume that they're literally, we know who the main guys are going to be in that team. Like David Fafita is going to be a massive part of that team for their strike, like as their strike weapon. But at the moment, like the team is still trying to find an identity, and I don't know if it goes well, bringing Cameron Smith in is obviously going to be a great move. But if they bring Cameron Smith in and things fuck up, or he gets injured, or it doesn't really seem to click, so many things can go down, and then it's a media scrutiny, it's a media hubbub, right? Where now the Titans are there's a spotlight on them because they've made a lot of big signings. They're looking like they want to be a team that's going to challenge for the top spots. What happens if after 10 rounds, like they're 3-7, and Cameron Smith is playing shit, and then you're asking Ash Taylor and Jamal Fogarty, is like, Cameron Smith is actually really good at footy, but he's been playing really shit at the Titans. Is it maybe because you're not as good as Cameron Munster and Jerome Hughes? What can you do to be better than those two guys? Like, what's going wrong? And these young guys are like, I don't fucking know. I don't know if that's going to be good for their progression. I don't know if that's going to be worth it. And while I do understand like what it means to get Cameron Smith there, I don't know like if long term it's the best decision to make, particularly getting to this point now where it's easy for him to not have a preseason at Melbourne Storm because he is the fucking Melbourne Storm. It's not the Gold Coast Titans. Like, the coach of the Titans doesn't know what Cameron Smith likes and what he doesn't unless they've been talking to each other throughout this whole time. And more to the point, I think that he hates the Broncos. Hasn't he done enough to us? Hasn't he done enough? Like, every single time the Melbourne Storm come to Brisbane, they just absolutely towel us up. They just fucking towel us up. I think I've gone to the last 3 Melbourne Storm versus Broncos games at Suncorp, and I can tell you right now, on camera, I don't remember the last 20 minutes of any game because I'm so horrendously shit-faced from just, drinking down my sorrows that, I think we lost 40-4 in 2019, and I only remember the 4 there because I remember I think Tony Staggs scoring at the end and being one of the few Brisbane Broncos fans left and spilling half of my beer celebrating because I was that shit-faced. Like, if Cameron Smith is doing this just to get back at the Broncos, go find another hobby. Like, you've already burnt us enough. You've absolutely fucked. Like, there's no pulse left to the Broncos. But yeah, it's interesting because I think the NRL would definitely we'll let you get him cut price because having Cameron Smith playing in the NRL is going to bring in more fans than Mitch Rain playing in the NRL, right? There has been some speculation that that the Titans have been looking at getting the cheese. So again, if they can't get the cheese for this year and they can get him for next year, that's a pretty good stopgap option to have Cameron Smith coming in for 1 year and then Brandon Smith coming in, because then you can plan your system around Cameron Smith as the hooker, and then you can bring a guy in that's literally been playing under the exact same system for the next season. And then the versatility that Brandon Smith provides as well is awesome. But these are so many ifs and buts. And also as well, like going back to it, is who do we think the Titans are without Cameron Smith? Like if Cameron Smith doesn't come to them and they continue going the way they are right now, which we would assume is without Cameron Smith, like do they have enough to make the 8 regardless of Cameron Smith?
I think they do. I'm very excited about the Titans this season. I will say, that $600,000 that, you mentioned being cut price for someone of Cameron Smith's caliber, I'm happy with it. If it was a couple of $100,000, like I think somebody, Sonny Bill Williams was on a couple of $100,000, and I was like, bullshit. He just came off $1 million overseas or whatever, and he came back on that kind of money. Like, it was absolutely
fucked.
fucking
robbed them. He still robbed the Roosters at $300,000.
It was absolutely fucked. But, $600,000 is not bloody nothing. And it kind of makes sense to me because, he's not the $1 million star that he was, and it's not in the same system. So $600,000 is like, yep, can you come have one last hurrah? And if indeed you're right, that it's, kind of a stopgap and, just getting him into the Titan system to maybe be the mentor for some future players and blah, blah. Like, it all makes sense to me. I'm happy with it. But that's my exact point. He is an old man. Like, he's old. And he's set in his ways, as many old people are. So I would even wonder if going from the Storm, where he's had it his way for a very, very long time, like he runs that team, he's the second coach, he's got all his creature comforts, and then he goes to the Gold Coast Titans, and coach is like, "Shh, Cameron, I respect you. You're the captain, or you're the leader of this team, but I am the coach, and I'm talking now." He's going to crack the shits. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's going to be a few things there where the old man in him will probably show, but. Enough about the Cameron Smith debacle. We've spent a good amount of time on it. We're probably going to still cover the Titans 2021 prospects as if he's not going to sign. Spencer and I both agree that he's not going to sign with the Titans. We think he's done. He's going to move into his nice hinterland property and fade away into oblivion. But let's proceed with a preview of the Titans based on the likely event that he isn't playing. So, Spencer, what do you reckon of the Titans in 2020 first? What did you think of their last season?
So, yeah, I think they had the look and feel of a side that is young, is hungry, but is definitely on the ups. Justin Holbrook, who I didn't really have any idea who he was before the start of this season, has proved to be a pretty good footy coach. I don't think that can be taken for granted. And it was definitely you... Being a Brisbane Broncos fan, I don't love it when the Gold Coast Titans whoop our ass, but I do like seeing the Queensland clubs go well, and I loved watching the Gold Coast Titans play last year because even when they were down and they were, copping it, they didn't really give up. And that's something to be said about a team that historically has had a tendency to kind of roll over. Ash Taylor has definitely had his demons the last few years. A lot of pressure. You sign a kid for that much money early on and you put him into a team that just didn't have the talent around him to succeed. It was great to see him being the second fiddle to Jamal Fogarty. I don't mean second fiddle as a detriment. Some of the greatest players in NRL history have always had another guy that sort of gives them the ball. Someone that sort of controls the boring stuff and then allows him to sort of be the player that he wants to be. I think that was huge for them. And then also Jamal Fogarty. He just came out of absolutely nowhere. The trajectory for the Gold Coast Titans is definitely up. You look at who they have decided to bring in for this season, and most media outlets have them blowing the roof off the top 8 and maybe even the top 4. And on paper, I can't question that. I really can't. But yeah, with these expectations, come a lot of pressure, and not only pressure from themselves, but also from other teams. It's very easy, or not very easy. Nothing in the NRL is easy. But if we saw the Bulldogs last year against the Rabbitohs, towards the end of the season, sneak one off of them. Beat them up early in the game, got out to a decent lead, and then controlled the game just for the rest of it. And the Rabbitohs could just never. And sometimes good teams just every team just has a bad night. But there's a difference between, who do we have this week? Oh, we have the Canterbury Bulldogs. Okay. Well, we have the Brisbane Broncos. It's all right. But then for now, it's who do we have this week? We have the Gold Coast Titans. And then you open up any newspaper And you go, Gold Coast Titans, like young forward pack looking to bring the beef back to the Gold Coast. And it's like, oh, okay. And you got your guys like your Josh Papalis, or your Nelson Asafa Solomonas, or your Rhea Hargreaves, or your Kickouts, or James Fisher-Harrises who read that shit. And then if they're playing them that week, it's like, they're a beefy forward pack, are they? Okay, bet. And they can have all the players that they want to bring in. Like, who they brought in? Fucking one is like Herman SA. Pretty solid, like one of those forwards we've been talking about, where if you want to be winning premierships, you want to be winning games, you need a guy that's going to make everybody else's job easy. Herman SA does that. Tino, I'm going to butcher this. Fasul Malawi. Fucking weapon. An absolute weapon. As a Queenslander, that's the type of guy that you want to be building your side around. Obviously, David Fafita, Broncos lost him. I've already touched on it a little bit. Wouldn't pay $1.3 million if I was the Broncos. But if you're a young team with a lot of cap space, if there's any guy you want to be, in your forward pack and as a strike weapon, it's definitely David Fafita. So on paper, they look fucking phenomenal. Also looked really good on paper last year? Broncos. Who also looked really good on paper the year before last? The Broncos. We had Matt Lodge. We had Payne Haas. We had David Fafita, Tavita Pangai Jr., Patrick Carrigan, all in our forward pack. On paper, you go, well, it's a pretty fucking good forward pack. Yeah, it is. Who you got in fullback? Oh, a young up-and-comer like AJ Brimson. Oh, yeah. We had a Jermaine Isako once. Or who do you have in centre? Like young upstart who can break a tackle and score a try. Brian Kelly. Oh, yeah. We have Katoni Staggs. Oh, we have young halves who have shown a lot of promise and are looking to take that next step into NRL stardom. Here's my Anthony Milford. Can you please hold him for me? I'm not saying that they're all going to falter and go the same way as the Broncos. I'm not going to say that at all. But what I will say is that there's a big difference between being the hunter and being the hunted. And the Titans are now making that next step because all eyes are going to be on him and all teams are going to be wanting to punch him in the fucking mouth. Because they've got a big forward pack and they've got a young team, and the young team is going to be scrappy and hungry and they're going to be looking to get these scalps. But the Titans did not win a single game against a team in the top 8 till the very last game of the season against the Newcastle Knights. And I can't comment on that game in terms of what it means. Obviously you always want to win every game that you can win. And in terms of, coming into the next season, a win against a team that finished 7th is a pretty good win. The Newcastle Knights did get bounced by something like 30 points in the finals the next week. But it was a win nonetheless. But that's the thing. The Titans beat teams that they were supposed to beat, but they couldn't beat the teams that they weren't supposed to beat. Right? And the talent wasn't there. But now the talent is there. But do we see them beating the Melbourne Storm twice a year? Do we see them beating Penrith twice a year? Do we see them beating the Roosters twice a year? Do we see them beating the Raiders twice a year? And I say no to all of those. So right there's 5 teams that I think are better than them. There's 6. And then I go, do I see them beating Manly twice this year? Maybe once. Okay. Around that 6th or 7th, right? Do I see them beating the Newcastle Knights twice a year? No. I don't see them beating the Newcastle Knights twice a year. So the teams that I have them maybe winning a couple games against, winning their games against, are going to be teams below them. I see them beating the Broncos twice and the Cowboys twice and the Dogs twice. I don't see them beating any of the top 5 twice, even once. And then I see them sort of milling about there. So I think these expectations need to be cut down just a little bit, because it's all well and good to have a forward pack of these young guys that are real big superstars until one of them gets put on their fucking ass and they don't want to lead the pack anymore.
Yeah, I think the comparison to the Broncos is really interesting. I never really considered it like that. You found some like-for-like players there, or particularly at least expectations versus reality. When you guys are excited because you have this centre, we had this centre, and we still got last place. So I see that. I think the biggest problem with the Broncos is not the talent. It's not the talent. It is the culture. It was the attitude. And that's the difference, I think, between the two teams at the moment, is that, the Gold Coast have gone from an underdog status of expected to come dead last and said, fuck that, we're not coming dead last. And it's off the back of a half that didn't even have a contract at the start of the season. He got brought in, I think, a couple games in or something and just overachieved. And that was the Titans in 2020, was overachievers. And yes, I agree with you, didn't get a couple of the wins over the teams that you would want them to get wins over to be a top 8 team. But they weren't far off, which was still an overachievement. The fact that they almost beat the Roosters, the fact that they almost beat a number of top 8 teams, was just like, wow, I didn't expect this from the Gold Coast Titans, and now they've wholeheartedly improved across the park. So yeah, they found Jamal Fogarty, who has really proved to be a good little general there, which hopefully can take some pressure off Ash Taylor. But that man needs to fire fucking well this season. The forwards can't fault them. I think got a crazy good pack. More importantly, they got rid of the dead weight. Over this off-season, they've got rid of some of the worst signings in rugby league over recent history. So they finally got rid of Bryce Cartwright. Oh, what a bloody chump. Honestly, the footage of that man pulling out of tackles, I would have just quit the game right then and there. Just get out. Just get out. You shit. Shannon Boyd. And kudos to him, man, because he was just like, yeah, I'll stop playing for you guys. No worries, just pay me my money, but so I can go on my farm. I'll go, but just pay me my money. And that's just poor management on the Titans' behalf, which they addressed when they, turfed out a couple of their senior executives, brought in some top Brisbane talent, and this is it's almost like, this is the David and Goliath story that is forming between Gold Coast and Brisbane. It's Brisbane's obviously done some things over the last decade or so that's really rubbed some of their legends up the wrong way, so much so that you've got Gordon Tallis down there. He's like, I'll mentor Tino and David Fafita to no end. I'm happy to help. He wants nothing to do with the Broncos at the moment because of the way they originally treated Kevin. Maybe it's getting better now, but it's just everyone's gravitating towards this amazing culture that the Titans seem to be building. They do have a couple of really good up-and-coming stars. I'm a big fan of Brian Kelly. I think he has the potential to be one of the best centres in the game. And if he can get some better ball from his halves, he will be. And AJ Brimson is going to be one of the top 5 players in the NRL within the next 2 seasons. That man is insane. Just has this all-round game that I just haven't seen. And it's been really disappointing that he's been out with a little bit of injury and maybe even to an extent the Titans weren't giving him the respect. They weren't giving him his respect. Because they had him come off the bench for a bit, number 40, and we'll use him as our strike player. Get him at fullback and leave him there. Because when you leave him there, such as working when he played Game 1 of State of Origin, weapon. Strong unbelievably strong for his size, so fast, so agile, and I think, there was a really good example of that when he helped carve up a team at the end of last season. So I think he's going to just get better and better. So I'm just looking across the park at the Titans. I'm like, wow, I'm super excited. I've developed a massive soft spot for the Gold Coast Titans. And the fact that they got so close to the top 8 last year and have now considerably improved upon that team, that's a top 8 team. Yeah,
I could, and that's it's the Titans really are going to be one of the funner teams to watch this year because you can't really you don't think that they're going to play bad footy. I don't think they're going to be a bad football team, at least to watch. But the one thing that is almost always underrated about the top sides is there's always got to be a perfect mix and blend of experience and youth. So it's not like you're playing Madden or you're playing, if you were playing a rugby league video game, if you still do, or FIFA, where the first thing you always do is you find the youngest players that are the highest rated and you bring them into your team so that you can nurture them and make them better. And then in a couple of years, your player that was rated an 85 or something that's now rated a 95. Because experience and awareness and all those stats don't really matter in a video game because you're controlling them and you see everything. You look at some of the top teams and Seabold with all of his errors and stuff like that he had, made a really interesting point about the Roosters that the Roosters in 2011, 2012, they blooded, and I think they had 4 guys in their team that had over 30 games experience. And of the other 13 guys, Boyd Cordner was one of them. I think Mitch Orbison was somebody else. And they had a lot of these young guys, Rhea Hargreaves as well. And slowly but surely, you keep these guys there and you slowly start to build around them. And that's how you build a club's culture, right? Is you have these guys that through thick or thin have always been there and they understand the ups, they understand the downs. When things are getting rough and you're going through a 3-game losing streak during the season, Jared steps up and he talks about what it means to him to be a Sydney Rooster and why it matters so much to him and why he, sweats his sweat and bleeds his blood and raises his forearm to everybody's neck that he runs at for the Sydney Roosters. And I worry that what's happened with the Broncos is going to be the problem for a lot of other teams, is that you don't properly prepare for older guys sort of moving on or leaving them. And like of the guys that the Titans have lost, you bring up, Jai Arrow. And Jai Arrow hasn't been around there for that long, and he was obviously a Broncos boy before he came to the Titans. But again, he's been there for the last few seasons, and if there's a guy that's been consistently good and just rolled his sleeves up and done his job, it's Jai Arrow. Another guy that they've lost, obviously it's sort of got sort of pushed away to the side, but Ryan James. And Ryan James, when the Titans were proper bad, he was the only guy that gave two fucks. And when obviously he wanted to go, he needed a new start, he wanted to move on, he was injured all the time. But when you don't have these guys that were there before, it's all well and good for coaches and GMs and all these guys in the higher up position to tell you what it means to play footy. But you need somebody that's actually there on the field with you. And right now, just trying off the top of my head, the most experienced Gold Coast Titans player is probably... Oh, fuck.
Ash Taylor.
Right, Ash Taylor. And nothing against...
Kevin Proctor as well.
Kevin Proctor. But even then, he came from the Melbourne system. He's not a out-and-out Gold Coast Titans player. And what I sort of say to that is that the Broncos had all these young guys coming through that were sort of in the juniors and sort of being nurtured, while we still had Sam Thaiday and Corey Parker still playing for us, and Joshy Maguire. But when you get rid of too many of the old heads and you bring these young guys in, young footy players now, it's not like it used to be in the 80s and the 90s where if anybody was under the age of 20, it was a massive deal. It's if somebody gets their debut after the age of, after they've become a teenager, after they've turned 20, that's almost more of an raising of your eyebrow than it is if they're younger, because you want to bring them in younger. It seems like whatever's in the water these days is peptides and human growth hormones, because Jason Taumalolo, I saw that bloke when he was 17 years old, and still to this day is one of the biggest human beings I've ever seen. That was when he was 17. He was fucking ginormous. All these guys are huge now, but they've always been the best. You watch David Fafita's highlights from when he was at Kibra Park. He was the best player on the field. What happens when you might still be one of the most talented players on the field, but then you get put on your ass against the Roosters, against Jadwaria Hargreaves? When the Roosters have guys that come up, Taukeiaho wasn't one of the best props in the game until he was. He was just a young guy that did his job, didn't do anything too crazy. And then, out of nowhere, it's just Taukeiaho had 150 metres this game and 30 tackles, and he kicks goals and he's a prop. That's how good teams find their talent, right? Just out of nowhere, this guy goes from being an afterthought to being one of the main guys. At the Broncos, we didn't have anybody that could bridge that gap. And we've spoken about how they didn't have the guys there that were able to sort of bring the old guys, while the old guys were still there to help nurture the young dudes. And at the moment, the young guys are going to have to figure it out on the fly at the Titans. And I'm not saying that they're out and out not going to do that. I just think that that's a lot harder to do than it is to say that it is. And David Fafita and Tino and Herman SAS and Jamal Fogarty and Brian Kelly could all still have really good seasons where at the end of the year, they're all up the top in their Dally M positions respectively, and they have solid seasons, they make a few rep sides. But it's the consistency. It's those guys that week in, week out are going to give you exactly what they want. That might only get you 100 metres a game, but they never get you less than 90 or more than 110. David Fafita's going to have some games where he's just swarmed on every single play, and he might only get 60 metres. Or they might just run it at him all game, and he might have 40-something tackles, but he's just buggered, and he can't do anything in attack. And the only way that you deal with that is you play footy. You get that experience, you acclimatise to it. And David Fafita is still so young. He's still so raw, and to put the expectation on this young kid, despite how big and how good that he is now, you're setting yourself up for failure if you think that they're going to be anything more than, I've tipped them to finish around 9th. I wouldn't be surprised if they just squeak into the 8. If they do make the 8, they're not going to do much. And that's okay, because they just need to get that experience up, because they've got David Fafita now for 3 years. They've got Tino for 3 years. Don't expect them to make the finals or to make any noise this year, because that's not what this team is built to do. You want to give Jamal Fogarty another year. You don't want to give him the pressure and have it be a Flanagan situation, right? Where at the end of the season, the Titans don't finish where they want to, and they go, oh, well, yeah, the team had everything around it, but just the halves didn't do very well. And then you just fuck Fogarty and Ash Taylor off. Well, then now the halves that are coming in are oh, shit, we've got to perform. We've got to perform really well, otherwise we're going to be out on our ass. And then you breed this culture that if you have one bad season, you're out on your ass. But the thing is, these guys are still getting paid a lot of money. So if they feel that they're not wanted, but you've still got contractual agreements, they'll just do a Shannon Boyd. And I'll leave, but you're going to have to pay me the last 2 years of my contract. So let's let these guys nurture and grow together. They're going to have some games where they're going to look really good. And they're going to beat the Storm or the Panthers maybe. They might beat them by a field goal, like really close. There are going to be some games as well where just off the opening kickoff, somebody drops the ball. And then after 20 minutes, they're down 18-0. Whether or not that game finishes 40-0 or 30-12 are going to be the games that mean the most to the Titans, because it's going to show like who are the leaders, like who's going to step up. And I think it has to be Jamal Fogarty. Like, we can say all we want about Fafita. He's a fucking gun. I wish the Broncos still had him, but we were never going to be able to pay the money that he was. He's never met a tackle he doesn't like breaking. He's never met somebody he doesn't like running into. But he's still so young, and now he's going to be the guy. So he's just the X factor by default. But if Jamal Fogarty can keep going like in the upward trend like this, and not do the Anthony Milford or the Ben Hunt, and not expect too much of himself, and trust Ash Taylor to do what Ash Taylor needs to do, and I trust whoever's going to be the hooker and whoever's the forward and the outside backs, this team, like, and you want to build sustained success in the NRL. You want to be like the Storm and the Roosters. The Titans play this next 2 years right, they could be successful for the next 10 years, without a doubt.
See, yeah, I definitely think that the Titans are building for the long term, and that's the best play, but fuck me, the time's still now as well. Like, the Titans have got a huge shot this year, in my opinion. I think a few things are aligning, like, even, for example, like, I think if Ash Taylor doesn't play his absolute dick off, he's playing in Brisbane Rugby League next year. I don't think any other club's going to take him. The performances he's put in for a couple of seasons now, probably a little bit better last year under the help of Jamal Fogarty, but yeah, if he doesn't fire and like actually crush it, he's not getting another contract with the Titans and probably won't get another one in the NRL. So I think if he rises to that challenge, then we'll see the best of him finally, and that'll help the Titans.
Yep.
Yeah, I've definitely seen David Fafita go missing in a game or two from here now and again, but at the end of the day, like, if you sub Arrow out, and I think Arrow's underperformed the last couple of seasons. I think I haven't liked what I've seen of him. He had a bit of injury, that's cool, but like when he came back in, came off the bench for the Titans and didn't make much of an impact. So for me, if you're going to lose an Arrow and then add a Tina or a Fafita, give me a Tina or a Fafita every single day, now you've got both of them. So like double win. But more importantly, I think the biggest thing for the Titans is they don't have a silver spoon in their mouth. They've got to earn every single thing that's coming to them. So with the Broncos, I think are living off legacy a little bit, or some of those guys are just like, yeah, with the Broncos, like, doesn't matter, like, we'll be right. Or even like inter-season, inter-game, it's like, oh, this is the Broncos, like, someone will pick up the slack. But they obviously didn't. And I think the Titans don't have that mentality. I think it's like, no, I literally need to play for my contract, and we need to play for the success of this team because it's had no success. So I think they've all got a point to prove, every single one of them, even these new stars they've brought in. So like, I think they're shaping up to have a huge year. If Ash Taylor does fire, if Tino and David Fafita just do their jobs, AJ Brimson just does what he do, I've got them at 7th. I think they're in the 8, but I do agree that I don't think they're going to be challenging for a premiership this year, but I think getting into the 8 this season and, having a game or two in the finals will be enough to spur those guys and this team into a rise that results in a premiership within the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's the hot ticket, isn't it? Like, I don't think this year is their year. Like, and it's also as well, you can't just look at, like, what is this team doing? You've also got to go, like, what is every other team doing? And the Penrith Panthers are definitely going to be around for the next 5 years, we would think. The Sydney Roosters are starting to get a little long in the tooth. So, like, this year they still look like a strong contender. But next year they're probably going to start falling off the wagon a little bit more. And then, at the time, obviously we don't know who they're going to have. But, like, they're definitely, like, a lot of their players are getting to the end of their careers. Look at the Rabbitohs. They're kind of in limbo. A few guys that are getting old, but, like, still a relatively, like, well-aged, experienced side. And then you've got the Raiders as well. So those are the top 4 teams that I think, top 4 or top 5 teams that the Titans are going to eventually have to beat. And outside of the Roosters, I think all of those, like, 4 teams, so Melbourne, Penrith, Canberra, and South, are still going to be around in 2 or 3 years' time. And they're not going to be going anywhere without injuries or severe, player losses. So it's going to take the Titans just a little bit. And there's, like, pretty much from round 10 last year, we pretty much knew who the top 4 or 5 were going to be. And it was just really them playing out for who gets the week off, and how do we sort of, like, see how the rest of these teams match up. I still see the Titans like not really being able to match it with those the like the 5 to 8, or I don't know, the best of the rest, we'll call them. So I see Manly have got a lot more growing to do in them what they did last year. So their Manly versus Titans game is going to be fun to watch. Gold Coast versus Newcastle games is going to be like that Spider-Man meme, because they're basically the exact same team, like built the same way. As to we're still a little young, but we're also trying to get like wins up right now. But look at how the Knights went. They were the same team a couple of years ago as well, like a young team on the up and getting these good signings. And it doesn't just happen overnight, because like the Roosters and the Raiders and the South, like they don't give a fuck who you are and who you've signed. Like even look how long it's taken the Raiders to become perennial premiership threats. Like they were the same thing for a while. Like they had a lot of young guys coming through. Like they had a young forward pack, they had young backs, but like they could never just like get over the hump. But what helps you get over the hump is getting towed up by good teams and realizing what the good teams are doing and making shrewd signings. Like if you could look back and 10 years ago and say, oh, the Raiders have signed Sia Soliola. Fucking News Corp wasn't blowing their dicks in the water for that signing, and they still don't now. But like at the end of the day, like when you talk to the Raiders players, they'll go like, oh, like who really stands out to you? Like who's one of the guys you love playing with? They'll go Sia. Why is that? Because he just does the shit that I don't want to do, and he loves doing it, and he just makes me want to play better.
Spiritual leader, Sia Soliola. Man, I don't think they're going to have a space in the 17 for him this year. I think there's so much talent there that they're not going to have a space for him. But he doesn't even need to be on the field to have a leadership position in the Raiders team. Like, I'm so excited for that team, but it's obviously not what we're talking about right now. But you're right, the Raiders had a couple of fucked up years in 2017, 2018. So we're only 2 years into a bit of success there. But, the Knights is a good example where, like, they're still building. They've been sitting in 7th, 8th for a couple seasons now from what I can recall. Maybe a 10th thrown in there somewhere. But, it's been slow and steady. I think the problem is that they've actually had a couple of dickheads that have still been in the team that have held them back. Mitchell Pearce.
Yes. And that's it, right? Like I firmly believe that if Manly can show that they are who I think they are, then that top 6 for me is pretty much set in concrete. And then it just comes down to the last 2 spots that I think the Knights should occupy one of. So that makes it to 7th. And then you've got like that final spot at I've got the Knights 7. We've got Parramatta as well. So that's the thing, right? So we go through this. We got Melbourne, Penrith, Sydney, South, Canberra, Newcastle, Parramatta, and then we think Gold Coast Titans. So there's some competition there. Like, and that's the thing. Like these teams are gonna have to like fight, scratch and claw, just to get into a shot to probably be towed up by whoever finishes 5th. And like at the moment, you think of who might be finishing 5th. You got a toss up between the Roosters, the Raiders, the Rabbits, the Storm, or the Panthers. So it might not even be a good thing to make the finals in 8th this year as a young team, because you might just get absolutely demolished so badly by a team that's still like up there that you come into the next season not up to scratch. So that's why I have the Titans coming 9th. I don't think they're going to be a bad team. I think they're going to be a very good team. I just think that they're going to just be a lot better teams. Like they're going to beat the Dragons and the Tigers and the Broncos by 3 or more tries pretty easy. You can put that in your multi. But and they're going to lose admirably to those top teams, but it's just going to come down to those final 20 minutes when they're still in it, where the Penrith Panthers are going to know that when they're running a play down David Fifita's side, that David Fifita's probably going to get it, and it's going to take a little while for Ash Taylor and Jamal Fogarty to figure out how to sort of like play their card. Because again, Panthers with Cleary and Kickout, same kind of system. They didn't go straight to the grand final. Got to the grand final last year, but that because they had so many other things around them. They had so many great strike weapons, and they had the maturity. They started like playing around, like they're not playing around with each other, playing with each other. And then from there, then the success sort of comes. But, there's still a long way to go, like even to the start of the season. Like we said, Cameron Smith could end up being there. And then again, that completely throws the entire season up on its head. But they're a team that you definitely don't want to miss any of their games, because they're going to be in a lot of them, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And there's nothing that gets me more revved up than watching an edge rower run over a half, and David Fifita's going to be doing a lot of that this year.
And let's not forget either. We think we're pretty confident about who's going to be in the top 5, top 6, right? Like honestly, like based on last year's performances, looking at this year's rosters, we think Panthers, Roosters, Raiders, Souths, who am I missing there? Melbourne. So like there's your top 5, right? Except the year before, last year, the Panthers came 12th. So there's always 1 or 2 teams that, like, out of nowhere just becomes a star team, or vice versa, there's a team that should be an absolute killer that just falls to shit. So we've talked about a couple of those ones so far. So, I thought that the Manly Sea Eagles were one of my top underperformers from last season. So we're going to have another Manly Sea Eagles this season. Who is it going to be? Who of those top 5 or top 6 that we're talking about is going to just fall from the face of the earth? It's not going to be the Raiders. It could be anybody else. It's definitely not them. But, like, who is going to fall out? And could it be the Titans that just skyrockets? I think so. I think 7th, minimum.
Thanks as always for listening. If you're here with us, you have a really serious rugby league problem, and for that, we thank you. We release our episodes weekly, where we preview and review every single game in the National Rugby League, and also deep dive into some of the biggest issues affecting our great game. If you've liked what you've heard, we'd love it if you left us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or Google. We'll leave the link in the description below this podcast. Even better, if you could share this podcast with a friend or family member, that'd be fucking awesome. If you have a question you'd like to ask us, or if you really disagreed with anything we've said, you can leave us your comments in the section below or on Facebook or Instagram. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and hit the subscribe and notify buttons on your favourite platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. For now, that's it from us. See you next week for another season preview. Cheers.